It's been 4 years since the Trump administration relaunched federal executions in Terre Haute after a 2-decade pause. Under the Biden administration, they're on hold for now. And as WTIU's George Hale reports, a new obstacle could make it much harder to start them again.
Bill Breeden is a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, and he does volunteer ministry for prisoners on federal death row. He served as minister of record for prisoner Corey Johnson and stood next to him as he died by lethal injection in 2021.
But within a few minutes, Corey began to flex his fingers as much as he could. His hands were very tightly bound, but I saw his fingers begin to flex, and then he said, I feel like my hands and mouth are on fire.
WTIU obtained an autopsy showing Johnson suffered from a condition called pulmonary edema, meaning liquid poured into his lungs while he was still alive. If he was conscious, he could have experienced excruciating pain, something akin to waterboarding. Experts say it's not uncommon in lethal injections using a drug called pentobarbital.
So I didn't really know what they were using to kill him, but it really doesn't matter to me. They're trying to find a humane way to commit murder, and there is no such thing.
While we've learned a lot about the executions since they ended in January 2021, the federal government has managed to keep one crucial detail secret: the supplier of the pentobarbital used to kill Johnson, at least until this spring.
We're going to dive straight into our main story tonight, which concerns the death penalty.
Last Week Tonight host John Oliver says his staff spent years trying to identify the company that manufactured the chemical used here in Indiana. Oliver says it's a Hamden, Connecticut-based company called Absolute Standards Incorporated. It isn't a traditional pharmaceutical manufacturer. It makes chemicals for calibrating office equipment, not drugs for humans.
But we're pretty sure they're making execution drugs as a side hustle, and I think our case is pretty strong.
Connecticut abolished capital punishment more than a decade ago.
And it's a value that our state holds very dear. The majority of the people in our state hold very dear. So with that in mind, it was quite unsettling and concerning to learn that we have a company based out of Connecticut that is doing something like this.
Lawmakers such as Saud Anwar, who co-chairs the Public Health Committee in the Connecticut legislature, started demanding answers.
When we reached out to the company as well, asking for a meeting and our concerns to share directly with them. They declined.
And the lawmakers weren't alone. Advocates opposed to capital punishment seized on the opportunity as soon as Oliver's show aired.
That was a Sunday night, and I ended up staying up all night creating a campaign that we launched Monday morning to get invite our members to contact Absolute Standards and ask them to declare that they will not do that anymore.
He says people who reached employees dismissed the allegations and said all this happened a long time ago.
And that just sort of stoked us even more. So we almost every day were reminding people, make the phone calls. A lot of people sent postal mail, emails, and then we were preparing to go and deliver petitions to them directly at their facility in Connecticut.
Weeks went by without any official response to State Senator Anwar or to the campaigners. Then they invited Reverend Breeden to go to Connecticut and confront the company's president directly about his experience watching Johnson die.
Confronting this company with the reality of what happened with their drugs. We were prepared to do that, and suddenly this letter showed up to the members of the Connecticut legislature.
The letter was from the president of Absolute Standards, addressed to Anwar and another lawmaker. He said the company stopped making the drugs used to kill prisoners in Terre Haute and had no intention of resuming.
I would have been excited to be there and was considering doing that when all of a sudden Abe comes up and says, wow, they punted. They didn't punt. They took the ball off the field. And I think that's a credit to them.
It's not clear if the government has another supplier lined up if it ever decides to restart executions in Terre Haute. For Indiana News Desk, I'm George Hale.
The WTIU news team has reached out several times to Absolute Standards while reporting the story, but did not receive a response. We're joined now by George Hale, reporting from Washington, D.C. Hi, George. Thank you so much for your reporting on this. It's about the supplier of pentobarbital for the federal death penalty, but this week we also heard news about the drug possibly being used here in Indiana. Can you tell us a little bit about that and this turn of events?
Yeah, we did. So on Wednesday, Attorney General Todd Rokita announced that the state of Indiana, as opposed to the federal government, the state of Indiana's Corrections Department has obtained its own supply of pentobarbital. So while the federal government seems to have lost its preferred lethal injection method, all of a sudden the state of Indiana could soon restart theirs.
So Governor Holcomb spoke out the same day Attorney General Rokita filed the request for an execution date. What did he have to say?
Yeah, so Holcomb issued a statement right after we saw that. And he said essentially that now that the state has found a means to execute someone, he has a duty, as the governor, to fulfill that sentence. Reporters asked him yesterday about pentobarbital in particular, since the state has never actually used this drug for an execution before.
We've tracked this particular drug and feel comfortable that not only it's the right drug, but also that the protocol is in place and we're prepared to carry out our duties.
And Holcomb also said that the death penalty serves as a deterrent against future violence, and that's something that critics of the punishment reject. One activist I spoke to yesterday noted that Indiana is both capable of protecting the public and criminals and punishing the worst crimes. And he said that we know that because the state hasn't carried out an execution in 15 years.
So what do we know about the man that they want to execute? When and where do you expect that to take place?
So we don't know when it will happen. His name is Joseph Corcoran. He's in Michigan City on death row. That's where Indiana's death row is based. He was convicted of multiple murders in 1998, and it's also come to light that he may be seriously mentally ill. He's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and according to some critics, that may be how he ended up on death row in the first place, because the state actually offered him a life sentence in exchange for pleading guilty, but he took the case to trial anyway, and he was sentenced to death.
So you're joining us obviously there from Washington, D.C. What can you share about your reporting there?
Yeah, I am indeed. I'm across the street from the U.S. Supreme Court. It's Capitol behind me, obviously. Anyway, but the Supreme Court is where we're starting later tonight. Activists from all over the country are going to gather here for an event that they've been holding for, I think, about 3 decades, more than 30 years, to call for an end to capital punishment.
Okay, George, one more. I understand yesterday you spoke to relatives of victims of Dylan Roof, one of the most high-profile prisoners in Terre Haute. What is their message?
So Dylan is, of course, the white supremacist who carried out a massacre in a predominantly black church in South Carolina. It's been almost 10 years, but not everyone wants him to die. And so yesterday I had a long conversation with Sharon Risher. Her mother was one of the victims of the massacre. She initially supported executing Dylan, but over the years she's come to believe that her mother wouldn't want him to die. And so she's one of the many people coming to D.C. this week to tell President Biden that he should spare not only Roof's life, but everyone on federal death row. And Biden can do that by commuting their sentences to life without parole.
All right, George, thanks so much for your reporting on this. Appreciate it.
Sure, anytime. Thanks, Joe.